The mockery of steel, the battlefield was silent. Only the wind moved across the broken stones. Two armies stood apart, waiting for the first strike, waiting for blood. Among them was a woman warrior, tall, fierce, her armor shining with pride. She carried a blade made from the strongest alloy of her people, a blade that had never failed. Her name carried weight among her kind. She was feared, she was respected, she was proud. Then a human walked forward, slowly, step by step, as if he had no fear. His armor looked strange. Not like the smooth designs of her people. It was patched with scars, dull in color, not bright, not beautiful. To her eyes, it looked like scrap metal tied together. She laughed loudly, so her soldiers could hear. "Is this what humans wear? Is this the protection of your kind?" "It is a joke," she said. The warriors behind her laughed with her, their voices sharp. They thought this battle would be over in one strike. The human did not answer. He stood still, his visor hiding his face. His silence felt heavier than words. The woman smirked, lifting her blade high. "Then let me show you the truth of real steel." She shouted, she rushed forward, her steps loud on the stone ground. Her blade came down with all her strength. The air cut with its speed. She imagined the armor breaking apart, imagined his body falling to the ground. But when steel met, steel, the sound was not of victory, it was the sound of shattering. Her blade cracked like glass, shards scattered across the ground, glinting in the light. She froze, her eyes wide, her hands trembling on the broken hilt. Around her, silence spread. Even the soldiers behind her could not laugh now. The weapon of her people, the blade she trusted, was gone. The human had not moved, not even one step back. His armor was untouched, shining in its strange, dull color. Through the visor, she saw nothing, no expression, only her own reflection staring back at her. Her pride burned into shame. She could not understand. How could her weapon, unbreakable, fail so easily? Her heart raced, her breath came heavy. She felt the eyes of everyone on her. The laughter that once filled the air now died, replaced by whispers of fear. The human raised his head slightly. No words, only silence. It was as if the silence itself was speaking louder than any victory cry. Her hand shook. She wanted to strike again, but there was no weapon left. She stood in front of him, broken steel in her hand. For the first time in her life, she felt small before an enemy. The soldiers behind her whispered among themselves, "Her blade. It shattered," one said. "His armor." "It did not break," another replied. Fear spread through the lines. The legend of her blade had fallen in one moment, and in its place stood the strange human, still unmoved, still silent, still unbroken. She looked at him with rage, but deep inside, fear grew. She remembered the pride of her people, the centuries of tradition, all shattered like the fragments at her feet. She clenched her fist around the broken hilt, her voice low but shaking. This is not possible," she whispered. But the ground told the truth. The pieces of her blade scattered like broken glass. The human finally moved, only one step forward. The sound of his foot echoed louder than her battle cry had. Every soldier, both hers and his, felt it. The silence broke with that single step, and in that moment, they knew the fight was no longer equal. The human, with his strange armor, had already won the first battle, not with his weapon, but with his presence, not with his strength, but with the unshaken steel he carried. She stared at him, her pride bleeding. The mocking words she had spoken now felt like chains on her own throat. She wanted to fight. She wanted to win. But as the shards of her blade caught the light, she realized something terrifying. The fight had only just begun, and already she was losing. The shattered pride. Battlefield still echoed with the sound of broken steel. The woman warrior stood frozen, the hilt of her shattered blade heavy in her hands. Her soldiers looked at her in disbelief. Their proud champion brought low in one strike that was not even a strike. Her enemy, the human, still stood in silence. His armor dull and scarred yet untouched. No glow, no shine, no beauty. yet it had endured what no weapon of her people had ever endured. Her mind went back to the halls of her training. She remembered the old masters speaking of her blade. Forged from the strongest ore of their world, they had told her it could cut through steel, stone, even bone without fail. She had believed it, trained with it, trusted it, and built her pride upon it. Now that pride lay in pieces at her feet, the whispers of her soldiers burned her ears. "She is weak," one voice hissed. "Her weapon is gone," another added, and worse, some looked not at her, but at him, the human. Standing like a statue, their eyes filled not with loyalty, but with doubt. And she could feel her command slipping like sand. Anger rose inside her, twisting with fear. She shouted at her soldiers, "Do not fear. He is only one man, one human. He hides behind his strange shell." Her voice cracked louder than she wished. The sound betrayed the tremble in her chest. Her men fell quiet, but the silence was heavy, not loyal. They too had seen what she saw. Her blade was gone. His armor was not. The human finally moved, not an attack, only a slow step forward. The sound of metal boots striking stone carried across the battlefield. Her soldiers shifted back without command, fear growing in them as if the earth itself told them to retreat. He raised his head slightly, and though no face could be seen, she felt the weight of his gaze. It was not the look of prey, nor even of equal battle. It was the look of someone who had already won. Her breath grew heavy. Her chest tightened. She wanted to understand, to make sense of what had just happened. How could human armor, built by a race considered fragile, withstand her strongest strike? She searched his body for cracks, for weaknesses, but there were none. Not even a scratch where her blade had landed. Her heart raged at the thought. "No," she muttered under her breath. "It cannot be human-made. It cannot." She wondered if it was stolen, alien technology beyond her understanding. But the silence of the man gave her no answers. His stillness became a weapon, and every second of his calmness pierced her pride deeper than any blade. Memories of her victories came flooding back. The duel she had fought, the warriors she had slain. They had all fallen to her blade, to her speed, to her arrogance. But this man, he had not even lifted a weapon yet, and already she was the one who felt defeated. The soldiers on both sides grew restless. Her own force shifted uneasily, while the human rank stood tall, their faith unbroken. It was as if the sight of their warrior unmoved gave them strength. The balance of the battlefield had turned with only one clash. Her shame became their fear. His silence became their courage. Her hands clenched the broken hilt until her palms bled. Her pride screamed at her to attack again, to prove her worth. But the truth whispered louder. She had nothing left to strike with. Her eyes locked on him, his armor dull, not shining like her own people's work. And yet, that dullness felt eternal, like a mountain standing against the storm. At last, the human moved his hand, slowly, deliberately, not to strike, but to rest it on the hilt of his weapon. Still sheathed at his side, he had not even drawn his blade. And that truth burned her more than the shards on the ground. The silence stretched until her chest felt like it would burst. Then he spoke for the first time, his voice calm, steady, but sharp as steel. "Strength is not in the blade," he said. "Strength is in the will that does not break." His words cut her deeper than any sword could. Her pride shattered further, not just her blade. Around her, even her own soldiers felt the weight of his words. Some lowered their weapons, unsure, their loyalty cracking. She wanted to scream, to silence him, to restore her honor, but she could not, for the truth of his words wrapped around her like chains. She looked down at the broken weapon in her hand. The symbol of her people's power was nothing but dust now, and the man before her stood as proof that her pride, her tradition, her arrogance, could all be broken. Her lips trembled, but no words came, only silence. The same silence that had once been her shield now became her prison. The human stood firm, unmoved, unbroken, and though the battle was far from over, she knew the war inside her heart had already begun. The hidden strength of humans, the woman warrior stood frozen, her pride bleeding heavier than any wound. Her broken blade still rested in her hand, but it was nothing now, just useless metal. Before her, the human stood silent, his armor dull and scarred. But it shone with an invisible strength. The silence between them grew heavy, until even the air seemed to press down on her. Around them, two armies waited, neither daring to move, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The woman's heart raged, yet her mind could not escape the truth. Her people had always believed humans to be weak, fragile, a race that survived only by luck or hiding. They were not born strong, nor did they have long traditions of warrior blood. Yet here stood one man, his armor resisting the strongest strike of her people's legendary weapon, and he had not even lifted his own sword. Her anger flared, and she spat words like venom. You think silence makes you strong? You think hiding inside that broken shell makes you greater than me? But her voice shook, betraying the crack in her confidence. The human did not answer, and somehow that silence was more terrifying than any insult. It was not arrogance, it was not mockery, it was patience. The patience of someone who knew the truth and had no need to shout it. The warriors on both sides began to murmur. Her own soldiers felt their certainty slipping away, and the humans, though fewer in number, now stood straighter, their courage rising from the sight of their champion. The woman realized with dread that her enemy's strength was not only in his armor, but in the faith of those who stood behind him. One man's silence was shaping the hearts of two armies. She lunged forward again, broken hilt in her hand like a dagger. Her strike was desperate, driven not by confidence but by fury. The human lifted his arm and caught the blow on his gauntlet, the sound ringing sharp. The hilt cracked further, nearly crumbling in her hand, and still his armor did not falter. Her breathing grew ragged, sweat sliding down her temple. This was not a duel of weapons anymore. It was a duel of wills. The human finally spoke again, his voice calm, even, yet carrying across the battlefield. Humans have no unbreakable blades, no sacred armor, he said. We endure because we must. We rise because we refuse to fall. That is our strength. The words struck her harder than any strike. Images of her people's pride flashed in her mind, their polished weapons, their endless boasting of tradition, their obsession with perfection, and against it, the human's truth burned bright. Humans survived not by perfection, but by stubbornness, by refusing to bow when the world tried to break them. It was a strength she had never respected, and now it stood before her, undeniable. Her soldiers shifted uneasily. Hearing his words, some looked ashamed, for they had laughed too when she mocked the man's armor. Now they saw it not as weakness, but as proof of resilience, and that thought frightened them, because if humans could stand unbroken even against their strongest weapons, then what else were they capable of? The woman's fury turned into a hollow ache inside her chest. She had thought victory would be hers within moments, but now she was fighting something she could not cut, could not shatter. It was not just his armor. It was his spirit, his will, his silence. Every second she stood before him, she felt her own strength slipping further away. She tried again, striking with speed, feints, and sudden bursts of power. Each blow was met with calm defense, his movements steady, efficient, never wasteful. It was as if he was a wall, a force that could not be pushed aside, and every failed attempt drained her, while he seemed untouched. Her frustration screamed inside her, but her body felt heavy. The human did not advance. He did not crush her. He only stood his ground, letting her break herself against him. That patience was his weapon. That silence was his shield, and slowly, painfully, she understood that she was not fighting against armor or steel. She was fighting against the truth of humanity itself, an enemy that could not be broken in spirit. At last she staggered back, her chest heaving. Her broken weapon finally slipped from her hand and clattered to the ground. The human lowered his arm but did not strike. He stood still, watching, his presence heavier than any blow, and in that moment, She realized something terrifying. The true strength of humans was not in the armor, not in the weapons. It was in their refusal to yield. It was in the way they turned weakness into endurance, scars into lessons, silence into power, and that strength, invisible and unshakable, was what had just shattered her pride. Clash of beliefs. The battlefield held its breath. The woman warrior's blade lay in pieces, her pride cracked with it. She had struck again and again. But the human had not fallen. He stood calm, his armor scarred but strong, his silence heavier than a mountain. Her chest rose and fell as if she had fought for days. Yet he had not even drawn his sword. The whispers of both armies filled the air. Her soldiers looked uneasy, their trust shaking like loose stone. The humans behind him stood firm, their eyes locked on their champion. One man's quiet strength was shifting the weight of the entire war. She could feel the tide turning, and it filled her heart with rage. Finally she shouted, her voice sharp and desperate, "Why do you not fight? Do you mock me with your silence? Do you hide behind patience because you fear my people?" Her words rang across the stone field, but they lacked the power they once carried. She wanted to believe she still had control, but the truth was slipping from her hands. The human raised his head slightly, and for the first time, his voice broke the silence. "Strength is not in the blade," he said, steady and calm. "Strength is in the will that does not bend." The words cut into her pride deeper than her shattered blade ever could. Her soldiers shifted uneasily, some bowing their heads, some looking at her with doubt. The humans, however, lifted their chins, emboldened by every word. She felt the power of his voice ripple across both armies. Her jaw tightened, fury mixing with shame. "You speak of will," she hissed. "But what is will without power? What is courage without strength? A man may endure, but in the end, endurance breaks when the blade pierces the heart." She stepped closer, her eyes burning with challenge. "My people's weapons have carved empires. Our blades have broken worlds. What do your fragile kind have to stand on?" The human did not step back. Instead, he placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, still sheathed. For a moment, the battlefield grew tense, expecting him to finally strike. But he did not draw it. He only spoke. "Humans do not win because of our weapons," he said. "We win because even when broken, we rise again." The words struck her harder than steel. Her pride wanted to laugh, to deny, to reject his claim, but deep inside, she felt the weight of truth pressing down. She remembered the stories told of humans, how they had survived wars against stronger races, how they rebuilt after every fall. She had dismissed them as tales of desperation. But now, facing him, she realized those stories might have been warnings, not myths. Her soldiers looked at her, waiting for her answer. She felt their loyalty slipping, their fear rising. If she faltered now, the army she led would break with her. Her heart thundered in her chest, and she forced her voice to steady. "Then prove it," she spat. "Show me the will of your kind, and I will show you how easily I will crush it." The human lowered his hand from his sword, his visor reflecting her trembling face. "No," he said quietly. "I do not fight to crush, I fight to endure." His words carried no mockery, only conviction. And that conviction shook her more than the strongest strike. Her fists clenched. Her pride demanded another attack, but fear tangled around her legs. Like chains, she wanted to deny his belief. Yet every moment he stood calm, unbroken. Her own belief crumbled further. The clash between them was no longer steel against steel. It was faith against faith, pride against endurance, and she could feel her side faltering. The army stood still, waiting, watching. Every soldier knew this duel was no longer about weapons. It was about what each of them represented. Her people had built their strength on tradition and pride. But this man, this human, stood as proof that unyielding will could shatter even the strongest tradition. Her chest ached as the truth whispered inside her. This fight was not just for her honor, it was for the meaning of strength itself, and though she wanted to deny it, She feared that her pride would not be enough to win. The turning point, the battlefield, was no longer just stone and dust. It had become a stage for belief itself. Two armies waited, their eyes locked on the human and the alien warrior. Her pride was wounded, her weapon broken, yet she still stood, refusing to fall. The human, silent and steady, had already won more than ground. He had won the weight of silence itself. But the war around them did not wait. From the far side of the valley, another force stirred. Dark shapes began to move, creatures not loyal to either side. Raiders, mercenaries, monsters of the wasteland drawn by blood and chaos. Their cries cut through the silence, a sound that twisted the air. In that moment, both armies realized the duel was no longer their only danger. The woman warrior snapped her head toward the sound. Her soldiers shifted, their discipline breaking as fear rippled through their ranks. The humans, fewer in number, tightened their formation, but they too knew what was coming. The clash between two armies was about to become survival against a greater threat, and she hated the truth that grew inside her heart, that she would have to rely on the very man she had mocked. The creatures poured forward, teeth and claws glinting, their bodies twisted by hunger and rage. They cared nothing for pride, nothing for honor. Only blood. Both armies braced, but even together, the tide looked endless. The air shook with their roar, and dust lifted like a storm. The human finally drew his sword. It slid free with a sound that cut through the chaos, not bright or polished, but solid, real, unshaken. He raised it, his stance wide, his armor dull yet resolute. For the first time, he looked not like a silent statue, but like a wall prepared to take the storm head-on. The sight sent a strange chill through her, both fear and something she did not want to name respect. Her pride shouted for her to stay apart, to let the humans be swallowed, but her warrior's heart knew the truth. If she stood aside, her army would fall as well. The creatures did not care for sides. They would devour everything, and the thought of her people watching her retreat burned worse than the shame she already carried. She lifted her voice, sharp as steel. Hold the line, do not break. Fight as one or die as prey. Her soldiers steadied, their fear giving way to instinct. The humans tightened beside their leader, their movements quick and practiced. And for the first time, both armies faced the same enemy. Different banners, different worlds, but survival made them one. The first wave hit like thunder. Claws tore against shields, teeth scraped against armor. The woman's arm swung hard, cutting into a beast, her rage finding release at last. Beside her, the human's blade struck true, simple and efficient. Each swing carried no wasted motion, only purpose. Together, their blades cut a path through the chaos. She risked a glance at him. His movements were not graceful, not shining with elegance like her people's style. But there was a raw truth in his strikes, as if every blow said, "I will not break." And the creatures fell before him, not because of power alone, but because of his refusal to yield ground. It was then she realized the duel between them had already transformed into something else. As the waves of enemies grew, she found herself moving in rhythm with him. Her strikes covered the gaps left open. His blade intercepted claws aimed for her. It was not trust, at least not yet, but survival forced their steps to align. Her pride hissed at her for standing beside the human, but her instincts whispered another truth. Without him, the line would have already fallen. The creatures howled louder, pressing harder. The battlefield shook with their numbers. Her soldiers screamed, her people bled, yet they still held. Every moment felt eternal, every breath stolen by the chaos. And in the heart of it, she began to see the turning point. It was not in the fall of an enemy or the breaking of a weapon. It was in the way two enemies, human and alien, stood back to back. Her heart burned with confusion, because even as she struck, even as she fought, she felt a crack inside herself widening. The crack was not from fear, but from the truth she tried to deny, that perhaps strength was not in the weapon or the pride, but in the will to fight for more than yourself. The battle raged, the line held, and though the creatures were endless, though the ground shook with their charge, she saw that as long as the human stood, as long as his will endured, the line would not break. The realization cut her deeper than defeat ever had. For the first time, she was no longer fighting to prove herself. She was fighting to survive beside him. Asterisk. The warrior's choice. The battlefield was chaos. The creatures pressed harder, their screams filling the air like thunder. Dust rose in clouds. Blood painted the stone. And both armies fought side by side, though their banners once stood against each other. The woman warrior struck again and again, her body burning with exhaustion. Beside her the human stood firm, every swing of his blade steady, relentless. Unshaken, she hated the truth she felt in her heart. If not for him, the line would have already fallen. His presence steadied the humans, and now, even her own soldiers drew strength from the sight of him. They looked at her less, at him more, and that truth cut her deeper than any wound. But even as pride burned, survival whispered louder. She had mocked his armor, she had doubted his strength. Yet now, her blade broken, her pride shattered, she was relying on him. It was a chain around her throat, a shame she could not swallow. And still, her hands kept moving, fighting in rhythm with him. Every time a claw reached for her, his blade was there. Every time his stance left a gap, her strikes filled it. The unspoken truth settled in her chest. They were fighting as one. The creatures swarmed thicker. Her soldiers screamed, some falling, some breaking under the weight of fear. She saw the line falter, and for a moment, doubt clawed at her heart. But then she looked at him, the human, his armor scarred, his body battered. Yet his stance had not shifted. He fought as if nothing could move him, as if no storm could bend him. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. His strength was not in his body, but in his will. Her mind fought against the thought. Her people had always taught her that strength was measured in weapons, in victories, in tradition. But here, beside this human, she saw another kind of strength. A strength that did not shine, did not boast, but endured. And the more she fought beside him, the more that truth pressed against the walls of her pride. A massive creature lunged, larger than the rest, its maw wide with hunger. She braced for impact, too slow to defend herself. But the human moved first, his blade cutting across its neck, dropping the beast before it reached her. Blood sprayed, dust rose, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. She saw no mockery in him, no arrogance, only resolve, and that simple look struck her harder than her blade shattering. Her chest tightened. For years, she had lived by her people's belief that honor came from pride in weapons. But now, in the dust and blood of this battle, she saw another path. Honor was not in mocking the weak or shining in victory. It was in standing when others fell. It was in protecting even when broken. And this human, this fragile creature she once scorned, was teaching her that truth with every strike. Her soldiers faltered again, some ready to flee. She felt their fear, their eyes turning to her, waiting for her choice. And for the first time, she knew her decision mattered more than her pride. If she clung to arrogance, they would die. If she stood with him, they might live. The weight of that choice pressed heavy, and she realized the war inside her heart was reaching its end. She raised her voice, louder than the screams of beasts. Stand. Do not fall. Fight with me. Fight with them. She shouted, pointing her blade toward the humans. Her soldiers froze in shock, hearing her command. Never before had she asked them to stand with outsiders. Never before had she lowered her pride. But now survival demanded it, and in that moment, she chose. The humans heard her cry and shifted closer, their formation merging with hers. For the first time, the two armies fought not as enemies but as one. Blades, claws, and screams filled the air. The line, once ready to break, steadied again, and at the center of it stood two warriors once sworn as rivals, now fighting side by side. Her heart burned with shame, but also something new. it was not surrender. It was not weakness. It was the heavy, terrifying weight of change. She had chosen to fight with the human, and though her pride screamed at her, a deeper part of her knew this choice was the only way forward. The tide of beasts still raged, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope, not because of her people's blades, not because of their traditions, but because of him, the human who refused to break. And in the silence between screams, she admitted a truth she had never dared before. Perhaps the strength of humans was not something to mock, but something to learn. The legend forged the battlefield was drowning in chaos. The bodies of beasts littered the ground, their black blood soaking into the stone. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat was a struggle, yet still. The line held, not because of weapons, not because of numbers, but because two warriors, once enemies, now stood together. The woman warrior's arms ached, her body screamed with exhaustion. But each time her strength faltered, she heard the steady sound of the human's blade beside her. It was not fast, not graceful, but it never stopped. Every swing, every strike, carried the same message: I will not break, and that message became a shield for them all. Her soldiers, once trembling, now matched the rhythm of the humans. Together they fought as if born from one army. Fear gave way to endurance. Doubt gave way to determination. The tide of beasts pressed harder, but for everyone that leapt forward, two fell. The storm was being held, not by steel, but by will. Then the great beast appeared, taller than walls, armored in thick scales. Its roar shook the valley. The armies staggered at the sound, some nearly dropping their weapons. The woman felt terror grip her chest, for no blade of her people had ever faced such a monster. And she remembered her shattered weapon, remembered how easily pride had failed her. But the human stepped forward, his armor scarred, his body battered, yet his stance unshaken. He raised his sword, its edge dull, its weight heavy, but his will behind it brighter than fire. "Stand with me," he said, his voice cutting through fear like steel. And the armies obeyed, not because of orders, but because of belief. For the first time, they did not see a human or an alien. They saw a leader who could not be broken. The beast charged, its claws tearing the ground apart. The woman ran beside the human, her voice rising in a battle cry that echoed across the valley. Together they struck. Her blade cut deep into the monster's side. His sword pierced its neck. The beast roared, twisted, and fell, shaking the earth as it died. The silence that followed was louder than the battle itself. Both armies stared, their breaths heavy, their eyes wide. The woman stood over the fallen beast, her chest heaving, her pride trembling. Beside her, the human lowered his sword, his armor dripping with blood and dust. Yet he stood tall. In that moment, she understood. The fight was not just survival. It was the birth of something greater. Her soldiers looked at her, but their eyes no longer held the same unquestioned loyalty. Instead, many looked to him, the human, the unshaken wall. At first, she wanted to rage, to scream, to remind them of her victories. But then she realized something painful and freeing at once. Their respect for him did not erase her. It revealed the truth. Strength was not measured in pride, it was measured in will. Slowly she lowered her head, bowing ever so slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Her voice was rough but steady. "I mocked your armor. I mocked your kind, but today I saw a strength I cannot deny." The human did not boast, he did not gloat. He only answered with quiet words, "We endure, that is all." And yet those simple words spread like fire through both armies. The humans lifted their voices in cheers. The aliens stood in silence, some in disbelief, some in respect. But all of them knew they had witnessed something that would be told for generations. Not the breaking of a blade, not the fall of a beast, but the moment when pride gave way to truth. The moment when strength was no longer a weapon in the hand, but the will that refused to bend. The woman warrior looked at the shards of her blades scattered on the ground. Once they had been her greatest treasure, now they were nothing but a reminder. Her pride had shattered, but from its ruins, something stronger had been forged. She did not yet know what path lay ahead, but she knew one truth she would carry. Forever mockery had turned to respect, and rivalry had turned to legend. As the armies slowly pulled back from the field, the story already began to spread. They whispered not of the broken blade, but of the human who stood unbroken. They spoke of the warrior who once mocked him, yet fought beside him when the storm came. And though both of them were covered in blood and scars, they stood as proof of something greater. That strength was not in steel or tradition, but in the will that refused to fall. And so the legend was forged, not of armor, not of weapons, but of endurance, the kind of legend that would echo long after the dust settled, the kind of legend that began with laughter, but ended with respect. She had mocked his armor, but in the end, it was her pride that shattered and his will that remained.